The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Bradley leaned back, his grin cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm taking half your millions, including your grandmother's estate," he declared, voice echoing as though he'd already won. "My name is Elizabeth Morgan. I'm 45 years old, and never in my life did I imagine sitting in a Nashville divorce court, listening to my husband of 5 years demand everything I had worked for." Bradley sat across the room in the suit I had bought him, polished and smug, his golden hair slicked back like some cheap movie villain. Once that look had charmed me. Now it made my skin crawl. His attorney opened a thick briefcase, papers spilling out like weapons, each one a blueprint of Bradley's plan to rob me blind. Reporters scribbled in their notepads. Spectators leaned forward with eager eyes, already calculating how much he would walk away with, but they didn't know me. They didn't know the fire burning in my chest, the fury that had been simmering for years. Bradley thought this was about money. He was wrong. This was about betrayal, justice, and revenge. The judge's gavel struck once, calling the room to order. But inside me nothing was orderly. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like a drum of war. 5 years, 5 wasted years led to this. Bradley's lawyer rose, confident, arrogant. "My client is entitled to half of all marital assets," he repeated. The words poisoned the air. He wasn't just after money. He was after everything. My identity, my grandmother's legacy, my life's work. I clenched my fists beneath the table, my nails digging into my palms. My grandmother had built her fortune through sweat and sacrifice. She had taught me strength, resilience, and pride. For Bradley to claim it as his own was the ultimate insult. The spectators watched eagerly, as though this were entertainment. Perhaps it was a show to them, but to me, this was survival. I lifted my chin, forcing my expression into one of calm defiance. Bradley thought I would crumble under his greed. He didn't realize I had already decided. If he wanted war, I'd give him a battle that would leave him begging for mercy. As Bradley smirked, I remembered the night we met. Nashville's skyline glittered as he leaned over the rooftop bar, his words smooth, his smile dazzling. I was vulnerable then, lonely, and too willing to believe. He made me feel seen, adored, cherished. Or so I thought. In truth, he admired not me, but the doors my success opened for him. The dinners, the connections, the wealth. He was never my partner, only a parasite. The memories hit like shards of glass, cutting deeper with every flash. The expensive vacations he insisted upon, the subtle jabs at my work, the careless spending that I excused because I believed in us. Now, in the courtroom's cold light, the truth was undeniable. Bradley had been preparing for this moment all along. Every laugh, every kiss. It had all been part of the performance. My jaw tightened. Love had blinded me once. Never again. Now I would use the very lessons he had taught me, the art of manipulation, the power of appearances, against him. The lawyer flipped to a thick file labeled Morgan Estate. My breath caught. That estate wasn't just wealth, it was history. Generations of my family's sweat, preserved in land, antiques, and investments. "Your Honor," the attorney announced, "the inheritance was received during the marriage, and as such, is subject to division." My stomach twisted. No, that estate was never Bradley's. He hadn't known my grandmother, hadn't seen her hands cracked from labor, her nights spent balancing ledgers. To him it was numbers. To me it was blood. The judge scribbled notes unreadable. Bradley leaned back confident. To him, this was already won. But what he didn't know was that my grandmother had left more than money behind. She had left secrets, legal protections, hidden trusts, ironclad clauses buried in documents that Bradley's greedy eyes hadn't yet uncovered. I swallowed hard, the beginnings of a plan forming in my mind. Let him think he was winning. Let him celebrate early. The bigger his fall, the sweeter my victory. By the second week of hearings, the courtroom was a circus. Reporters filled the benches, cameras clicked outside the courthouse, and headlines screamed, $1 million divorce, Nashville heiress faces, greedy husband. I walked through flashing bulbs with my head held high. Every step, every glance was calculated. If Bradley wanted to humiliate me publicly, I would turn his greed into his downfall. Inside, whispers rippled as I entered. That's Elizabeth Morgan. She's worth millions. He'll take her for everything. Let them talk. Let them speculate. The louder the noise, the harder Bradley would fall when the truth came out. My attorney leaned close. We can fight this." "I don't just want to fight," I whispered back. "I want to destroy him, because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about sending a message to Bradley, to the world, and maybe even to myself. You can betray Elizabeth Morgan once, but you'll never get away with it twice." "Great, I'll finish the full story." Below are chapters 6 to 13 in English, continuing Elizabeth Morgan's revenge-style family drama. Each chapter is 200 words and keeps the same tense tone and momentum. After court adjourned, I retreated to a small conference room with Mara, my attorney, and an accountant whose sharp eyes could find crooked numbers in a haystack. The fluorescent light hummed like a judge's gavel as Mara spread documents across the table. "You weren't careless, Elizabeth," Mara said softly. "Your grandmother protected this estate, more than you know." The accountant tapped a ledger. "There are contingencies, hidden trusts, and a shell structure that could shield much of it from a marital split." Relief flickered, then hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about legal technicalities. It was about strategy. If Bradley expected a quick payout, he had miscalculated the woman he'd married. He didn't understand how layered my family's protections were, or how ruthless I could be when provoked. I wanted him to feel the same exposure he'd tried to impose on me. The plan grew in quiet, careful strokes: expose his greed, prove his intent, and leverage the law's nuance to reclaim what was mine. Outside, Nashville buzzed on. Inside, we reshaped the battlefield. I felt strangely calm, like an actress who had finally learned her lines. Bradley would soon discover that the quiet moves are the deadliest. Bradley's lawyer kept up the theatrics, serious questions, pointed motions, a performative outrage that the camera loved. But his case relied on assumptions: that inheritance equals marital asset, that appearances trump intent. For every assumption, we found a rebuttal. Mara called witnesses who knew my grandmother, her longtime accountant, a neighbor who handled the estate's affairs, even a retired judge who'd counseled my family decades ago. Each testimony pinned the estate further outside Bradley's grasp. Evidence accumulated: dated letters, transcripts of meetings, and a notarized note tucked into an old safe. Bradley's confidence began to show hairline cracks. He would flash a forced smile for the gallery. In private, his composure slipped. I watched him at hearings, an actor losing focus. He whispered heatedly to his counsel, his jaw clenched. And once, I saw him glance not at me but at the courtroom doors, as if searching for escape. I didn't rush the end. The law is patient. Revenge need not be loud. It only needs proof. And proof, like rain, slowly dissolves even the toughest stone. Bradley's mask was dissolving, bit by bit, into something uglier than I'd imagined. Late one evening, Mara called me with a tone I had not heard before. Calm, urgent. "We found something in your grandmother's archives," she said. "You should see this." We gathered in Mara's office under the hush of night. The safe's contents were modest-looking at first. Letters, old wills, yellowed newspaper clippings. Then Mara slid out an envelope with my grandmother's handwriting. Her voice trembled as she read, "Instructions to transfer certain holdings to an irrevocable trust in the event of exploitation, plus names of trustees and contingencies." My grandmother had not trusted the world, and for good reason. The documents revealed a legal fortress designed to withstand predation: irrevocable trusts, contingent beneficiaries, and complex corporate layers, each designed to keep the estate intact, even if a predator like Bradley tried to claim it. Tears pricked my eyes, not for the money, but for the woman who had planned so carefully for a granddaughter she would never truly know. I felt both grief and a fierce gratitude. The fortress she built would now be my weapon. When Bradley crowed his next victory in front of reporters, I smiled inwardly. He had no idea the walls he thought he'd breached were still standing, and they were about to close around him. Midway through the trial, Bradley made a misstep. In cross-examination, under pressure, he lied about a transfer. Small at first, then bigger as Mara pressed. He claimed ignorance. Emails proved otherwise. The courtroom watched as his story began to fray. Reporters smelled blood. The narrative shifted subtly, from heiress versus greedy husband to possible fraud. Bradley's allies retreated into vague statements. His demeanor curdled into desperation. I had wanted him embarrassed. What I hadn't planned for was how quickly his bravado would turn into self-betrayal. Mara struck with precision, not malice. She asked questions that made Bradley's own conscience betray him, and the inconsistencies piled up like evidence. The judge's brow furrowed. Bradley's attorney began to sweat. Outside the courthouse, new headlines hinted at darker possibilities. Concealment, questionable transfers, even witness tampering. My senses sharpened, not because I craved ruin, but because this was the justice owed to a legacy nearly stolen. When the week ended, I walked past Bradley on the courthouse steps. He looked smaller somehow, lost in a storm he'd summoned for himself. I felt pity, brief and cold, then turned away. There was still work to be done. Victory rarely comes without cost. As our case gained momentum, I discovered allies in unexpected places. A former business partner of Bradley's who'd been pushed aside, a housekeeper who'd noticed odd behaviors, and a bank officer tired of laundering vague transactions. Each brought a piece of truth, but with alliances came new threats. Bradley lashed out. Subtle threats in private messages, veiled public comments that sought to intimidate witnesses. He hired a private investigator to dig into my past, as if my life's honesty could justify his theft. It only revealed his pettiness, old friends I'd helped, small kindnesses he tried to twist into motives for his theft. The trial became a messy web of truth and lies. I had to protect those who stood with me. I settled quietly with a few witnesses, fortifying their statements, offering legal help, and when necessary, a shield from Bradley's intimidation. One night, I received a note slipped under my car windshield. A threat, crude and personal. My hands shook as I crumpled it. Fear arrived, brief, sharp, but did not stay. Fear is a tool. Used well, it sharpens resolve. I folded the paper and handed it to Mara. "Now we have it," she said. "Now we can use it." Evidence, patience, and public scrutiny built a pressure that Bradley could not withstand. A sworn statement from his estranged brother corroborated our timeline of secret transfers. The bank finally turned over flagged transactions. Documents we'd uncovered in the safe connected his expenditures directly to attempts at concealment. In court, the air felt electric. Bradley's voice faltered under cross-examination. His defenses collapsed like a house of cards. The judge's expression, first neutral, then concerned, was a mirror of the public's shift. Where there had once been curiosity, now there was contempt. Bradley's last-ditch motions were denied. The judge ordered an independent audit and appointed a guardian to protect disputed assets. For the first time, I saw panic in Bradley's eyes, raw, unmasked panic that might once have been hidden beneath a practiced grin. I did not celebrate with glee. Justice, when rendered, is heavy and complicated, but I did allow myself a quiet moment of triumph. My grandmother's name was safe again, and Bradley's scheme lay exposed for everyone to see. The final hearing arrived like a culmination of long months. Witnesses gave testimony that stitched together Bradley's intent, his patterns, his appetite for consumption at another's expense. Mara presented the irrevocable trust documents with the dignity of someone revealing a truth too long denied. Bradley's pleas for leniency fell flat. He'd gambled on charm. The court had no use for it now. The judge ruled in large part for the preservation of the Morgan estate, assigning the bulk to the irrevocable trust, and forbidding any transfer of assets tied to my grandmother's legacy. Bradley was ordered to forfeit certain disputed funds and face an independent probe into his transactions. As officers read the ruling, the courtroom felt smaller, as if the air itself had tightened. Bradley's shoulders slumped. The man who had announced he would take half the millions now sat diminished, his plans unraveled by the very laws he had misunderstood. When the gavel finally fell, I didn't scream or dance. I exhaled. The victory was not a simple triumph. It was a reclamation. The cost, the bruised trust, the public spectacle, would linger. But the legacy survived. Bradley would carry the scars of his choices. So would I. We were both changed. Life after the verdict was quieter, but not peaceful. I rebuilt slowly, reconnecting with distant cousins, securing the estate's governance, and establishing scholarships in my grandmother's name so that her legacy would uplift others. The trust's trustees proved capable and compassionate, honoring the woman who had worked so hard to protect her family. Bradley faded from the tabloids, his reputation in tatters. He kept a low profile, a cautionary tale at parties and in whispering rooms. Sometimes I caught headlines about legal repercussions still unfolding in his life. Audits, fines, reputational ruin. I felt no joy in his suffering, only a stern sense of justice served. At night, I would stand on my grandmother's porch with a cup of tea and think of the path that had led me here. The love that blinded me, the betrayal that hardened me, and the quiet, relentless work of law and loyalty that restored what was right. Revenge had been a fire, justice a steady flame. I had been broken and remade. I was Elizabeth Morgan still, older, wiser, and fiercely protective of the name that had been nearly stolen. The price of betrayal had been high, but the lesson was priceless. Never underestimate the woman whose past built a fortress. She will guard it with everything she has.